Hello and welcome back. I'm delighted today to be joined by Brittany Harris, the CEO of Qualis Flow, known as QFlow. Brittany, welcome.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. This is Kudos in Construction, and you're the one we're paying kudos to today. So let's start with finding out a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, sure. So my background is in civil engineering. I studied at the University of Bristol and started my career working for Mott & McDonald, then spent a short stint out on site in Hong Kong with Lang & Rourke, which was quite an experience. It was absolutely amazing. I'd love to go back.
Cool.
But then came back to the UK to work for Bureau Happold Engineering. But after a few years of sort of working in consultancy, I had thoroughly fallen in love with construction and engineering, but actually decided that it was not as efficient and sustainable as I had sort of naively hoped while I was at university. And so with my co-founder Jade, we set out to try and help it be a bit more efficient and a bit more sustainable.
That's fantastic. Some big names there, big company names there.
Yeah, absolutely. It was amazing, amazing group of people to cut my teeth with. And certainly working on site in Hong Kong was quite an experience. It's an absolutely amazing project, the MTR extension.
Cool. Excellent. Marvelous. Right. Okay. So let's get into this and let's chat about Qualis Flow, again, known as QFlow for people watching. And you co-founded that in 2018, like you suggested in your previous answer. So firstly, you alluded to it, but can you explain where the idea came from and then what it actually is?
Yeah, sure. So when I met Jade, it was back in 2016, and we actually founded a not-for-profit, an NGO. And again, that was very much focused on sustainability. That's always been at the core of what we do. But we found that we couldn't scale that and have the impact that we wanted at the pace that we really felt was necessary with that sort of not-for-profit model. And so we decided to move to profit with purpose. And so we were really looking at our own industry and our own careers. And at the time, Jade was working on Crossrail with Skanska, and then she moved on to HS2. And I was spending all my time as a designer trying to make projects as sustainable and as efficient as possible, but really having no oversight of what's going on during construction. And then Jade was spending all of her time on Crossrail, collecting all this data and all this information about the materials coming on site, the waste going off, how efficient they were being. But none of that data was really being used for anything or fed back to anyone in a meaningful way. So the project really wasn't able to improve. And we thought this was complete madness. You know, she had all this information I wanted and I couldn't get hold of it. And it really wasn't structured in any way that was useful. So really, it was the idea of QFlow was sort of born out of frustration, but also seeing this opportunity for the industry to, do so much more. So we pitched it to the Royal Academy of Engineering, and I mean, we were still in full-time employment at this point, so it was just a bit of fun. But they liked it, and they invited us onto what they call the Enterprise Hub, which is sort of like a mini MBA. And all of a sudden, we realised this thing had a bit of legs, and that maybe we should commit a bit more time to it. So in 2018, as you said, we quit our full-time jobs and went full-time on QFlow. And it was only really then when we started chatting to the industry and really speaking to all of our peers and people way above us in the industry saying, why is this so difficult? Like, what's going on here? Why is this such a broken system? And really what it came down to is you had these amazing, passionate people spending all their time, like Jade, just collecting data and it going nowhere and having no time to do anything with it. And then you have all these other people at the other end of the spectrum having no access to it and no transparency over what's going on. And we're like, oh, okay, so maybe we can be more sustainable if we just kind of talk a bit more. And so we started working with Canary Wharf contractors, trying to solve this very specifically around timber and timber compliance. And it was just a real pain point for them. So we built out this MVP, so this minimum viable product, and deployed it on Wood Wharf, which is this huge site in the heart of London. And, it literally was held together with sticky tape. And they used it for a few months and they're like, wow, yeah, this is really saving us time. It's massively reducing our risk on site of having uncertified timber in the project, which ultimately was saving them hundreds of thousands a year. And they're like, look, we'll buy it. You make it work. We'll have it. And we're like, okay, there's really something in this now. So very quickly we hired a team and actually got it built out properly and deployed with Canary Wharf. And it's kind of snowballed since then. So now we track all materials, not just timber. So concrete, steel, all the way down to HVAC systems and like nuts and bolts and even PPE. That was quite interesting during lockdown. And then we track all the waste going off as well, as that sort of was an increasing pressure point with the new HMRC regulation. And now we're servicing sites across the whole of the UK. Our furthest north is in Glasgow. So yeah, it's gone crazy.
Brilliant. Wow, fantastic. Such a great story in like 5 years or however many years it's been, roughly 5 years,
just
I think.
over 4 years now.
Oh, 4 years. Oh, fantastic. That's great. Yeah, of course it is. So in those 4 years, you've mentioned a few there, but what have the success stories been to come out of what you've created?
So good question. I mean, there's been so many to choose from, and they've all been really different. Obviously, the Canary Wharf one was like one of the sort of starting catalyst points, but every site that we've worked with has revealed something new to us. So we're sort of constantly learning with our clients and constantly improving on the product. I think one of my favorite ones was when we were doing an expo at HS2. So we'd been out with CSJV on the enabling works, and we were about to transfer onto the main works with SCS, and HS2 had asked us to sort of come and present it to the other joint ventures and see if anyone else was interested. So we put up this dashboard of the data from the project, and it was such a simple thing. We had a map of where their waste was going. And one of the guys came over, I'd never met him before, and he was like, "Is this our data?" And I was like, yeah, this is from Euston, the enabling works. And he was like, "Why is our waste going over there?" And I was like, "I don't know. I mean, it's your project. You tell me. Why is the waste going over there?" And he's like, "That's miles away. Why are we shipping it that far when we've got all these amazing disposal facilities like right next door?" And just by having that data visualized and being able to probe into it and see how much of that waste was really being shipped halfway across the UK, they were able to have quite a focused conversation with their supply chain and change that. Which resulted in a huge carbon saving. So just from that one conversation, we saw just this massive shift in the way that the project was working, actually using that data to reduce their carbon emissions, which is just such a tiny thing of like even the data that we had, but was just one of those sort of epiphany moments where like, okay, yeah, this is going to make a difference.
Fantastic. It's strange how looking at things in a certain way or a different way can highlight those elements or those problems or issues that you didn't even know were there, particularly when it comes to the data and the information, because we've got data coming out of our ears nowadays, but it's how you utilize that data and what you use it for and how you show it that's more important.
Absolutely. I mean, we always say to our clients, like, all we're doing is we're giving you the data. We're making sure that it's complete, it's clean, it's valuable, and we're trying to present it in a way that's digestible. But ultimately, it's only as useful as what you do with it. And so we currently do a lot of hand-holding with our clients to sort of try and help them unpick what the actions might be off the back of it. But ultimately, you can take a horse to water. Can't make him drink. I mean, yeah, QFlow's trying to lead people, but it's still down to the industry to make that change.
Yeah, absolutely, collectively as well. I just want to rewind a little bit because I wanted everyone that's listening and watching to know who you are, a bit about your background, a bit about what you're doing right now. But I think it's important to ask this question in terms of your work and everything like that. Have you always had a passion for this type of thing? So sustainability, social, environmental impact, and I suppose I'd add into that technology as well.
Yeah, so definitely always had a bit of a sort of fixation on sustainability. As a kid, it manifested in volunteering for the RSPB and doing bird surveys and picking litter out of hedgerows. I grew up in the country, so very, very
brilliant. Same.
And then it sort of spiraled as I got older and started doing sort of fundraisers for education projects in sub-Saharan Africa, because I had a friend at school whose father had a foundation out there. And it's always been a really cool part of who I was. And I think as I was going through my A-levels, I was trying to figure out what I could do that would have the most meaning. So I told the Royal Academy about this, but I originally wanted to go into the West End, and I was going to go into musical theatre, and I've got a diploma in classical singing, all these random things, and I suddenly realised that wasn't going to have the kind of impact I wanted, and I sort of fell out of love with it a little bit. And then one of my physics teachers said, "Have you thought about engineering?" And I was like, what is that? No one had told me before. I sort of didn't really know what that meant. I thought if you did science, you had to be in a lab.
Yeah.
And I started digging into it, and suddenly I uncovered what civil engineering was. And I was like, oh my God, these guys, they literally build the world around us, all our water infrastructure, our roads, our communication, the things that make life easy. Like, that's where I want to be. And so when I went to university, I joined Engineers Without Borders, and I sort of found this weird marrying of my sort of obsession with sustainability and my love for science and problem solving. And that's sort of how I ended up there. I think the technology thing is actually more recent. I'm by no means a tech buff. My partner will tell you I'm actually not that great with computers. Along. But the thing I love about technology is it's an enabler. And I think that's why I've ended up in the tech space, is because, you know, it's not just that it's exciting and sort of interesting ways of solving a problem, but they're actually very pragmatic ways in many ways. And QFlow, one of our investors described it as like some of the most unsexy tech you can find. And I was like, well, thanks for that. But what he means is it's pragmatic. Like, on site, it's incredibly simple. There's no like flashing lights or hardware or like weird AI. I mean, we do use machine learning, but it's all in the background. And for the guys on site, they take a photograph, that's it, that's their job done. It's quick, dirty, easy, pragmatic technology that gets a job done and is problem solved. And I think that's why I love tech, is it can take the boring, rubbishy stuff off your human hands so that you can do the exciting things.
Yeah, and what you've created and you provide, it reduces friction, it saves on resource, it saves on time, and it saves on money. And usually the simplest things do that. It just needs somebody to see it from a different angle.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to your work with EcoSwell. For those that don't know, give us a little rundown about that and what it's all about.
Yeah, so EcoSwell is a fantastic charity based out in the north of Peru. So they're in a sort of near Talara in Piura. And I ended up working with them through Engineers Without Borders. So when I graduated, I went and did a sort of long-term placement with EWB with EcoSwell. And my fourth year project was on alternative sanitation solutions. So when I went into civil engineering, the thing I said I would never do is work in sewage. And then in my fourth year, I was like, poo is amazing. And just like, how do you handle waste just became really fascinating. So yeah, I did an entire study on it.
If you start a presentation or a seminar with that, you're gonna grab everyone's attention.
I mean, yeah, it's certainly one of the weirder things I say.
That's the soundbite right there, isn't it? Poo is amazing.
Poo is amazing. I mean, talking about dirty tech, like simple dirty tech, I think, so I ended up working with EcoSwell. So they're this really cool charity that's based themselves in Lobitos, which is, it's a fishing village community in north of Peru. It was home to one of the very early oil hubs. So when British Petroleum was extracting a lot of oil in Peru, and they were based in Lobitos. And weird fact about this town, it had the first cinema in all of South America. And it's a complete nowhere town. It's so tiny, it's so bizarre, but the footprint of that cinema is still there. But during the the military coup in the 70s, all of the British Petroleum got kicked out. They took all of their money with them as well, and the town kind of collapsed in on itself. All the infrastructure got stripped, including the water and sanitation they had. So I was sent out there to try and figure out how we could get them responsible, sustainable sanitation. They did have water, but it was very intermittent. It was, not reliable, and they were filling up these big tanks, and sometimes the water wouldn't come on for days, even weeks at a time, which obviously was incredibly difficult. And it was heartbreaking for these guys to pour water down their toilets to flush them, because they had Western toilets, but no water infrastructure. And they also had no treatment infrastructure. So they had raw sewage pooling on the beach where they would then go fishing and surfing. So the whole thing was just like a completely broken system. So I went out to do an assessment, basically just almost doing research and social science, really, chatting to the community and understanding what it is they really wanted, what they needed, and then trying to figure out which engineering solution, if it was an engineering solution, was actually going to help fix that. And so we ended up looking at dual composting toilets. So dual vault means they're very secure and safe from a hygiene factor, because you don't touch them while there's any sort of live bacteria in there. but doesn't rely on any water, produced a nutrient-rich fertilizer so that they could grow trees, which was something they were particularly keen on in a desert area, and also allowed them to have a sort of decentralized waste treatment process, which is incredibly important. So yeah, a weird, quick and dirty technological solution to quite a complex systems problem.
Again, starting with the simplistic, looking at it from a different perspective and working out the best route forward. Speaking of best routes forward, seamless as ever, the work you're doing with EcoSwell and other things that you're seeing, it puts you kind of on a global scale, or to view problems on a global scale. Does this help look for improvements and how Qualis Flow, known as Q-Flow, can grow and develop and change over time?
Yeah, I think the main thing that sort of working with EcoSwell and Engineers Without Borders did that really stuck with me and has sort of come through everything that I've done since is how important the user is, or the person who's interacting with the infrastructure or the engineering. And I think it's something that we forget as engineers sometimes. We work on these massive projects where, building Crossrail, for example, it's over miles and miles, and it's touching thousands of people's lives. So sometimes it's hard to forget the individual in that. And it's something that when you're designing a toilet for a family of 7 in a sort of literally a desert community with no access to water, you really have to think about the user and how they're going to cope with it, how they're going to maintain it, whether this is really going to fit with their lifestyle and their culture. Like, are they going to like using a composting toilet? Do they prefer Western toilets? Like, what's that about? And so I think sort of taking it back out to the big macro scale and looking at sort of global challenges, in everything we do, whether it's designing a toilet or an app for someone on site, or whether it's actually designing a carbon strategy and something that you're trying to get your entire corporation and business to change and adopt, you need to think about the individual and the user who's going to interact with that. And I think this is where a lot of carbon strategies have fallen down in the past, is that they're these big sweeping corporate ideas where it's like, we're going to cut carbon by 40% by this date. And you're like, great, how is the individual part of that process and how are they going to do that? And if you can't answer that question, you're going to really struggle to actually see it enacted. And I think that's such a small but simple thing that we can all take forward.
Yeah, you see these big numbers and these big targets, and the further away the target is, the more it's difficult to engage with that. And the bigger the target is, the harder it is to see a way forward and how to break that down. So putting it from an individual perspective is massively important. So speaking of which, thinking of individual organizations, if you like, how should they set themselves up to try and reach sustainability targets or be more sustainable? What would you be advising them?
It's a really good question. It somewhat depends on where they're starting. And I think this is a challenge for everyone at the moment, is to understand your baseline. And we have this conversation pretty much every day with every client, is like, we just need to know our baseline. Otherwise we can't improve our carbon. And I think that's really the question for everyone, is knowing, where are you starting? What do you know? What do you know you don't know? And then what don't you know you don't know? And that's the hardest bit, is actually getting under the hood of things. And I think whether you're looking at waste and material data like you are with Q-Flow, or whether you're looking at, the social impact of your development, you do need to start from that baseline of, okay, what does good look like? What are we sort of happy with as the bare minimum? And then where do we need to go from there? If you don't know that starting point, you're kind of screwed from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to cut carbon. Where are we to begin with?
Yeah. And I think the scariest thing for the industry is, I think we all know that we've probably been underestimating our carbon, because when we look at how we actually report at the moment, we only really realistically capture around 40% of the data on these sorts of big aspects. And we do put in some sort of factors, so we'll sort of times it by 1.5 and sort of hope that cover it. But the reality is, when we start looking at the really raw numbers and we really do start getting down to the finer detail, those figures are much bigger than we anticipated. But there are also much bigger wins that we can gain by small changes, and you can't see them until you've actually got that clearer picture of where you're starting. So I think there's going to be this panic moment for the industry where we suddenly go, oh my God, we thought we were generating 100 tons of carbon a year and now it's 200. But then we're also going to see that actually cutting 80 tons of that is going to be straightforward.
Yeah.
Going to be small efficiency gains that can be done overnight. So yeah, don't panic. It will look bad to start with.
So let's come full circle then and end with yourself, Brittany. What excites you in the future for yourself or for QFlow or anything else that you've got going on?
I think the thing that's got me really excited at the moment is the sort of regulatory and investment market and what's happening around carbon. So when we started QFlow and we sort of started properly working with clients in 2019, sustainability was still just a tick box at best. It was sort of a nice to have. And we really were just working with the absolute bleeding edge pioneers. And everyone else was like, yeah, there's no real cost benefit, so why would I bother? Whereas now that's completely changed, where we're seeing sort of heads of sustainability being elevated to board level. They're part of the global strategic drive of a company. And, you know, you've got people like British Land who are putting in place internal carbon taxes because the government regulation hasn't caught up to where they know they need to be from a global investment perspective. And you see these, you know, massive investors like Aviva who are opening up ESG investment funds saying, we'll give you preferential rates on this new development if you can demonstrate over time these ESG and sustainability targets. And it's not just looking at the design stage now, it's looking at the as-built, the operational. And this is stressful for the industry, absolutely, but so exciting because this is actually going to see change. And the people who are at the front, who are leading it, like Landsec and GP and people like Multiplex, who have very strong sustainability strategies, but also a sort of a culture within their organization to help drive that, will get ahead and will win, and people will follow. So yeah, it's a very exciting time to be in the industry and excited about sustainability.
Fantastic. And that's a great place to end. So Brittany, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to speak to people doing this Kudos in Construction that have got a passion for what they do and enjoy what they do. And clearly you have that passion and you do enjoy what you do, which is fantastic. So once again, Kudos in Construction, thank you so much for developing or co-founding QFlow and developing that and continuing with the good work that you're both doing. And I wish you all the best of luck in the future.
Great. Thanks, Peter.